Good morning. Thank you for joining the opening session of COPLAC Annual Meeting 2020. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is MB Lufkin. I'm the Chief Enrollment Officer for Keene State College, and it gives me great pride to welcome you today and give you just the technical aspects of the meeting. We're running this session as a meeting versus a webinar, so feel free to turn your camera on so that we can all be in community together. And you can choose in the upper right-hand corner of your screen to either see speaker view, where you'll see the person only that's speaking, or grid view, in which case you'll see everyone that's in the meeting. We are going to be conducting a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Feel free to put your questions in the chat box, or if you prefer to ask your question live, simply put in the chat box the word waiting, and when it's your turn, I will ask you to unmute your microphone and ask your question. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our president, Melinda Treadwell.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, MB. I appreciate the support that you're offering today as we welcome the COPLAC community here to Keene State. The first and most important thing for me to say is welcome to the first COPLAC virtual annual meeting. I've been thrilled to be a participant over the past day, and I look forward to today, although I wish I were welcoming you here on our beautiful campus in Keene, New Hampshire. It is my privilege to host this event, and I look forward to continued engagement with all of you from across the country today. My thanks to Dr. Denise Battles, to Cole Woodcox, Claire Bailey, and the entire COPLAC community for helping to make this event a success. My appreciation to our Keene State College team, namely Veronica Rosa, our Vice President for Advancement and Constituent Relations, and her team in our Office of Ceremony and Events. For those of you who joined our opening ceremonies last evening, you have met Misty Kennedy virtually and also Mark Exemplar. It truly takes a village to pull an event like this off, and the team, all of you, have done an incredible job pivoting to bring this COPLAC community together in this way, so thank you all. This really is, having participated in COPLAC meetings over the years of my career, this meeting is an essential environment where the COPLAC community comes together, where like-minded institutions, faculty, staff, and administrators join together, partner, as the theme of this year's conference will identify, but also to share, grow, and deliver on our respective missions. And at this time in our history, what does partnership mean? What does it mean to be a college committed to the liberal arts, specifically our roles as public institutions serving our democracy and supporting our local communities? And at this moment in our history as a country, I believe this is our pivot, our moment to own our identity, to recommit to our collective work, and to support our institutions and the needs of our communities as we move to the future. Increasingly, we all are going to be challenged to collaborate within our institutions, with our corporate partners, to collaborate in new ways with our nonprofit partners, and with one another as like-minded spirits when we think about the value of the liberal arts in the higher education landscape. And as we, sitting in this meeting today, navigate a pandemic, likely recession facing our communities, particularly the rural communities many of us serve, and we navigate this pandemic and the international movement that's been brought on by unrest and outrage, we all, each of us, are experiencing and being affected in some way as individuals and as institutions. I believe this is our moment to lean in and to recognize that we have a role to play in overcoming inequity and preparing our graduates, and to work as communities of learners to make a difference in the communities that we serve, to help make a difference in this moment of history, and to help all of our communities thrive at a time where there are many challenges. And so today it's truly my honor to do two things. First and foremost, to thank all of you who elected to have your registration donated to community partners here in Keene. First and foremost, the Keene Housing Authority, the Keene Housing Kids Collaborative, has been a long partner for Keene State College. This group works with the children at greatest risk for economic injustice in our community, and also with regard to learning, achievement, and breaking the shackles of poverty in our region. And the Keene Housing Kids Collaborative will be today standing up food delivery for the food insecure in our community and to reach out to those kids that are most vulnerable. This is a long partner for Keene State, We've done tremendous work in support of and learning with this group. And so I thank you for nearly $1,500 that will make a direct difference to the health and well-being of these families. Also, our Monadnock Humane Society and our Center for Violence Prevention that deals specifically with women at risk and to families at risk for sexual violence in our community. Thank you. Your COPLAC registration dollars have been contributed directly to those local partners, and I thank you for that move. My second honor is to introduce this year's COPLAC keynote speaker, Dr. Mary Grant. Dr. Grant is a visionary leader. She is known to the COPLAC community, having served as the president at Mass College of Liberal Arts and as the chancellor at UNC Asheville. She is a brilliant light for those of us who know her. She has a long history of advancing and recommitting to partnership in her various roles, serving as the CEO and president of the Edward Kennedy Institute for the U.S. Senate, and now really leaning in in her role at Bridgewater State as the first senior administrative fellow for civics and social justice. Dr. Grant will be working with faculty and administrators, supporting K-12 schools and also the institutions of higher ed in and across the Northeast region, as we think about how education can help to break cycles of injustice, inequity, and inappropriate action by institutions and by agencies within our society. Dr. Grant has long been an advocate for social justice and committed to civics education, engagement, equity, and civic engagement. She is a mentor. When I called Dr. Grant to ask her to consider being our keynote speaker because of my experience with her, building partnerships at the Mass College of Liberal Arts, and then the work she has done throughout the history of COPLAC, I know of Dr. Grant's history, and I get a little starstruck just recognizing all that she has done as a mentor to me personally as I developed my skills as an administrator in higher education. So I'm thrilled to have Dr. Grant with us. She will be our keynote today, offering her thoughts for what the future will hold for the Public Liberal Arts College, but also what it means to partner as leaders in our communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Grant. And Dr. Grant, thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Melinda. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. And it's really great to see some familiar faces, some old friends on the screen. I asked to keep the screen view up so I could have a treat. And so it's wonderful to see Cole and Claire and of course, John Fever. I just think about John many years ago when we were fighting to get a bond bill to build the Science Center at MCLA. You were with me in that moment when I got the phone call. And so just so many good friends over the years. And I just appreciate so much all you do and the work that you do. So to the many colleagues here on the screen and the other screens, it is a real blessing to see all of you. Melinda, thank you for inviting me to share COPLAC 2020 with you. If I had been a little bit better organized, I might have a display of, it could be a gooey duck, it could be a t-shirt from Shepherd, it could be something from Minnesota Morris, Windbreaker, or it could be a collection of coffee cups and water bottles that we all get when we do the Trivial Pursuit at the end of this. So, I really feel badly for anyone who's new to this that you are going to be delayed in your collection of swag, because it's really one of the best parts of the tradition. So again, just delighted to be here with you. And when Melinda and I were having one of our conversations about today's conversation and what we would talk about, we met like this, as we're all doing right now. And she was sitting in her car and I said, oh, you're in your car. And, I'm a former college president to chancellor. I'm pretty observant. And she said, I am. And then she said, and I really need a cup of coffee. And I said, okay, so now we're looking at it, we're on Zoom. And she said, so I'm going to just start driving, but I promise you I won't look at my phone. And so now we're driving and I'm looking at Melinda and we're talking, and it dawned on us that this could be a really bad ripoff of comedians in cars going for coffee. And so maybe at the end of this, we could do a little poll and see if there's any market for college presidents in cars going for coffee. I'm not so sure, but we're all looking for ways to raise funds. So we could come back to that. And then as I began to think about my talk today, I wasn't quite sure where to begin or how to begin. So let me begin again by thanking all of you for what you do, how you do it, and that you do it. It is so important. And if I were to put a formal title on my talk today, I might call it, "We Need You More Than Ever." And no, really, this time we mean it. We really need you. Or, you know, I might say another possible title could be "The Beloved Community 2020. What would Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. say now?" And so as I think about all of these things, and for all of us, and particularly the historians in the crowd, and I know that there's a few, it's as if 1918, the late 1920s and early 30s, and the late 1960s are all happening at once and all together. And we know, everybody in this meeting knows that history does repeat, and we know that if we don't understand our history, we may be destined to repeat it. It's just quite something when it all repeats at the same time. You may have seen in Sunday's New York Times David Brooks column where he wrote about America is facing 5 epic crises at once and all at the same time. And I'm going to paraphrase. And he says, the first one is COVID. The second one is the rapid education of white America on the burden African Americans carry every day. The potential for a prolonged economic depression exacerbated by the health crisis. A political realignment, and social justice as quasi-religion driven by viewpoints. I'll come back to Brooks' piece a little bit later. But it's sobering to keep in mind that as of this morning, according to the World Health Organization, there are over 10.2 million confirmed cases of COVID worldwide. There have been over 500,000 deaths worldwide. In the US, there are over 2.5 million confirmed cases, 25% of all the cases in the world. There have been over 126,000 deaths in the United States, and confirmed cases are on the rise. Unemployment rose higher in 3 months of COVID than it did in 2 years of the Great Recession. And on a mildly bright spot in the COVID-19 downturn, unemployment rates are lower among workers with higher levels of education. For many of the students we all work with, that you all work with, cleverly identified as Generation Z, and I'm really beginning to think we just ran out of ways to identify them, so Generation Z. Unlike the millennials who came of age in the Great Recession, Gen Z was in line to inherit a strong economy with record low unemployment. However, 50% of the oldest Gen Zers, those between 18 and 23 years old, report that they or someone in their household have lost a job or have taken a pay cut because of the pandemic. We know that this will impact their ability to continue or complete their education. Across the country, across the globe, communities are marching, organizing, and demanding an end to racist practices, cultures, and policies that have systematically and historically been embedded within organizations, communities, cultures, habits, and practices. They are demanding that we not just say it, but we believe it and we act on it, that Black lives matter. This energy and these demands are within our communities and our campuses. They are hopeful and mobilizing, and we must take the time to listen, learn, and activate. We are witness to the outcome and the failure of leadership at the highest levels in the United States. The corruption of democratic practices, the erosion of the free press, the demeaning of facts and science, the dismantling of programs that have sought to unlevel playing fields, and the condoning of white supremacist actions in the mobilization of hate and fear. In a recent piece in University World News, Ira Harkavy of the Netting Center wrote, along with colleagues, that the 4 purposes of higher education, as they and the European Council see them, include the preparation for sustainable employment, preparing students for active citizenship, personal development, and creating a broad, advanced knowledge base and stimulating research and innovation. He noted that these concepts must be rethought in the face of the international crisis, that these purposes must be seen as a larger goal to develop and maintain democratic communities and societies characterized by participation, cooperation, and a commitment to the public good. Specifically, this involves the education of students for democratic citizenship and the creation of knowledge to advance the human condition. Harkavy notes that higher education must play a major role in helping to shape the post-COVID-19 world, and to do so by reshaping higher education itself. That to create a better post-COVID-19 world requires democratic civic universities dedicated to producing knowledge and educating ethical, empathetic students for just and sustainable democratic societies. It is essential, he says, for our future that academics, university administrators, government officials, public authorities, and community partners work together to assure that what needs to happen does happen. This civic spiritedness, this social solidarity needs to extend beyond the COVID-19 crisis and become higher education's defining characteristic. If Harkavy's call sounds familiar, if it rings at all true, it's because when I look at all of you, I think of the mission of the public liberal arts colleges and universities. I think of the work that you all do, the lives that you touch, the futures you help shape. I think of COPLAC. The safest prediction one can make is that the world will never be the same again. This crisis has and will continue to change communities, societal institutions, economies, and daily lives. The nature of the change is continuing to unfold, but we know because we have already seen it, it has and will continue to hit most hard communities and individuals that can least afford it. Preceding the current crisis, we've witnessed an erosion of trust in all kinds of institutions, churches, government, colleges, and universities. The declining trust in colleges has been fueled by rising tuition, concerns about the value of a degree. Think this week alone, we heard, or last week, we heard about let's swap out education for experience. Why can't we have both? And debates about the role and purpose of higher education. In this time of crisis, we have an opportunity to renew the case for higher education, its role in society. We have a public responsibility to make that difference daily, and you all do that. I'm sure you saw the piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education back in April, 15 ways that colleges are mobilizing to support their communities. From first responders to making Wi-Fi available, making masks and shields, creating PPEs, distributing food and supplies, and using your campus spaces as healthcare facilities. I am sure that all of your institutions are doing 15 things daily, if not more. Witness the slide that Melinda put up with the organizations that Keen is supporting. I think about my own time at MCLA when our local hospital closed suddenly with 3 days notice, and we turned our healthcare facility into an urgent care clinic for the community because our community needed us. That's what colleges and universities do. As we think about the work we are doing now and the times we are in and will be in, perhaps we must overlay our COPLAC-based community work and partnerships with Dr. King's framework for the beloved community. Dr. King envisioned communities as places where all people would share in the wealth of the earth, where poverty, hunger, and homelessness are not tolerated, where racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice will be replaced by an inclusive spirit of personhood. The post-COVID-19 world, or maybe we should say continuing COVID-19 world, must infuse those values of the beloved community. It must be built into the functioning democracy that values inclusion, equity, deep engagement, racial and social justice, and it must ignite these values from words to action. In fact, if you look at where you are located, it would be hard-pressed to argue that you are not, your organizations are not, at the heart of the community. But with that too comes responsibilities and stressors. We have to look at ourselves and what we must do, or as the sociologist Eugenio Tironi reminded us, that to determine what kind of education we need, we first have to decide what kind of society we want. What do our students need? What do our communities need? What does our democracy need? It's hard just trying to imagine how to reopen and do so safely. It's hard to imagine how we do what we must do in the face of daunting budget cuts and great uncertainty. Partnerships, which are essential, are going to continue to require care and sustained investment. They'll require attention, trust, patience, humility, creativity, and flexibility, to name just a few. We're going to have to re-examine partnerships in the context of who is at the table, and most importantly, who is not at the table. Whose voices are we missing? What are the perspectives that we must have to do our work better, differently, and more just? We have to do the deep listening. This is vitally important and surprisingly difficult. We have to sit with the uncomfortableness of the listening and the work that we must do. It's time to take stock of the most pressing conditions and team up together and learn anew, yet again, from one another. When I think about students and graduates of COPLAC institutions, I've had the privilege over the years to award many a student a degree, and I see many of them now as alumni out in the wider world doing magical work. We know that regardless of the major or the discipline that they're in, they're encouraged to create and perform, do their research and publish and take on the unknown with creativity, curiosity, and resiliency. Those are at the heart of a liberal arts education. They're problem solvers. They're individuals who approach their studies with a curiosity and a critical eye. Individuals who think on their feet, who are empathetic and analytic, who can communicate clearly and who bring people together to make change happen. They use and understand that technology is a powerful tool that supports and expands education, creativity, and connectivity, and that these tools continue to change and evolve. This is the first generation that has come of age with a smartphone in their hand from day one, and the smartphone is helping us to hold ourselves accountable. We can continue to use technology to link and build community. We know from the research that employers want our graduates. They want public liberal arts students. They want individuals who can think, who understand a global context, who can do that work, are creative problem solvers, and take the most advantage of the opportunities ahead. And when I think about the time that we're in and the incredible challenge, how do we take that challenge and turn it into an opportunity, which is really hard to do when it's so overwhelming. This is a time to go deeper in the mission. This is a time to embrace the mission of the public liberal arts and the work that you're doing in community in the classroom. This is the time to continue to produce an educated and enlightened citizenry. We need it more than ever. This is the time to be a better neighbor and deepen those partnerships within community, to collaborate, to solve problems and build partnerships. This is a time to continue and demonstrate how you contribute to the economic, civic, intellectual, cultural, and social development through your educational missions. This is a time to lead in civic learning and embrace student-centered education as a core value. This is a time to move from thinking and talk to actions that contribute to a stronger, sustainable, inclusive democracy. This is a time to listen and learn and take action to remove barriers to racial and social inequality and invest in a culture where diverse racial, cultural, social, and educational interests and activities and perspectives can flourish. And this is a time to knock down the silos that discourage collaboration both internally and within the larger community that we serve, to bring to bear all of our strengths and resources. Let's think about it for a minute. COVID-19 has rendered the academic calendar to be fairly irrelevant. It didn't care that we had final exams scheduled, didn't care about commencement, it didn't care about move-in dates or move-out dates. So why not, it didn't care that we had semester breaks. It didn't care about any of that. So why not re-examine what we've learned from this experience? What would a new calendar look like? Our campuses operate year-round. Our students and communities do. All of you do. How do we more deeply and sustainably embed technology to strategically and creatively address gaps, expand opportunities, and meet needs, and build partnerships? How do we intentionally diversify the student body and the faculty and the staff, most importantly, who work with those students? Let's truly step back and look at how we reward, encourage, and incentivize public service and engaged scholarship. Why not think about the serious work our students do in community and how we recognize, reward, and credential that work? Let's take a look at curriculum at all levels. How do we use capstone projects and social innovation labs to tackle the real community problems of the day? How do we examine curriculum to remove racial barriers and teach history with a renewed and refreshed lens? How do we develop genuine, sustained, mutually beneficial relationships between our universities and communities? You're all in communities that need you. I've been to so many of your campuses. Imagine what those communities would be like without you. And perhaps the most difficult, challenging one of this is to examine the competitive nature of higher education, what it would take to truly collaborate across institutions, public, private, 2-year, 4-year, across a range of institutions, organizations, and sectors with a commitment to supporting lasting change. That's not always easy to do. It's not in our nature. So I want to circle back to David Brooks's piece from the New York Times, where he raised concerns about social justice as not really doing what it needs to do. So I would say, let's call it social justice and civic action. Let's call it civic leadership, education, and engagement. Let's think about how we mobilize it as a call to action through voting and democratic procedures. This is not an academic exercise. This is an exercise in democracy, and there is so much at stake. As we think about the coming year, as we move through the crisis that we're in, and we look ahead to November, I want to put another crisis on your minds. Not to, and I'm sure you're all thinking about this, but the country will go through an election. And regardless of the outcome of the election, we are on the cusp of having major upheaval yet again. How does higher ed, how does the public liberal arts prepare for that? This is beyond the conversation around it's not a red issue or a blue issue. This is an issue of a democracy that's at stake, a democracy that's at peril. And we have a responsibility in the academy, in the public liberal arts, to be educating and informing our students to move from thinking to action to mobilization. Our students engage beautifully in organizing and getting registered to vote. Now they have to get out and vote. And that is something that we can be part of working on through exercises of how the democratic process works, to understand what's at stake if we don't have them work, to look at the connection between social justice, civil justice, racial justice, and the corruption and erosion of our democratic processes. That is at the heart. Citizenship is at the heart of a public liberal arts education. It is at the heart of the work all of you do beautifully every day and in such challenging times. And we need each other more than ever. The boundaries between our institutions and our communities are more porous than ever. When you think about the communities in which you sit and how dependent they are on you, it used to be a time when we would be out for a walk, whether you're a faculty member, an administrator, a college president, or a chancellor. And if you're in a small town, all of us have gotten the questions. How were your enrollments? Now those questions are bigger because communities, I think, truly understand more than ever how much they need their higher education partners. And our higher education partners understand more than ever the role we play in community. And we have to be pulling together in new ways because we need this. The recovery is going to be steep and long, but it will be better informed and energized by the participation of us doing that jointly. And that joint work is at the heart of what the COPLAC schools do, wherever you sit, wherever you reside. And the mission is so important, more than ever. And I think about a note card that a faculty member or a faculty friend at UNC Asheville gave me one time. And it's a treasure that I still keep. And it was a favorite quote from Nelson Mandela. And it says, "It always seems impossible until it is done." And the work may seem impossible, and it will seem that way until it is done. And the exciting news, the great news, is that it will never be done because the work is ongoing, the challenges will continue to mount, but the opportunities available to our students through your exquisite universities are what make the difference. The opportunities and partnerships through campus community collaboration is what makes the difference. And this is the time to embrace the mission deeply, strongly, and go forward together. And working in partnership is what's going to get us through this time. So I'm delighted to have a chance to just see your faces, to say a few words to you, to share some thoughts that keep me up at night, but to also know that I sleep better at night knowing you're all doing your important and powerful work and getting our students ready for the world ahead, which is challenging and daunting. But the education you provide and the opportunities you unleash is what will make the biggest difference in their future. So I thank you for the work that you do and the chance to share a few words with you today. And it's just a privilege to see so many good friends and colleagues who have been at this over the years, and to see so many new faces who are part of this important work going ahead. So I thank you. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions or have a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. A quick reminder that if you are interested in typing a question, you can simply type it into the chat box, or you can type the word waiting, and I will call on you to unmute your microphone. We're going to start with Melinda Treadwell with a question, please.
Thank you, MB. Mary, I wonder, so thank you for your remarks and for helping us reaffirm the value in some of the things that we're all sadly staying up overnight thinking about. But I'm curious if you could, for a moment, given your history in COPLAC, given your current role, what would you say for our faculty, for the administrators, and for the presidents on the call, for each of us, what would you say is the most important, or perhaps 1, 2, or 3 most important things that you would want to advise COPLAC to focus on as we're thinking of all of these daunting challenges, so many things? What would you advise that we do first?
That's a really great question, Melinda. I think first, go for coffee in the car. I think that's the very first thing I would do, always. And then maybe a glass of wine at the end of the day. That's the second most important thing. In the middle, I think it's about, the most important things is that the time is so uncertain. And I think that it calls for, as all of you are trying to gear up, some of you have already begun to open, but you think about the restarting of the school year in such a time of uncertainty. I think it's going to take a degree of flexibility and trust. Everybody's trying to do the best that they can. It is a moving target. And plans are being made, and we just, so I think it's that flexibility. It's that sense that there's so much uncertainty, so much unknown, and this is not a time to be pulling apart. It's a time to be coming together. So I think that when we talk about the classification of faculty, administrators, staff, I think we need to see ourselves as one university working towards a common goal, which is educating our students in the safest, best way possible. So I think it's flexibility and awareness that the situation is continuing to develop and evolve. I think the other piece would be I think the term "don't waste a good crisis" is extraordinarily cynical. I think that is a bad thing to think about. It's not right. It's not fair. I think that what we should be doing during these times, and I think this is where the power of this consortium comes in, is really being willing, more than ever, to look at how you share those resources and support one another, because this exceeds state by state. We've often had the challenge within the COPLAC consortium that a political climate in a state might drive what's happening or how well we can speak out or what we must do. I think that what we're seeing right now is we have a national crisis. So there's something that unifies us. We are in again, take party politics out of it. There's a national crisis. There's a lack of confidence in our democratic procedures. And then we are sharing the experience of a global pandemic. That's another thing that unites us. And the last thing is that every single state is going to experience deep budget cuts. So how do you really talk with one another and lead together and take more risks than you might have at other times? So I think that the power of the consortium is more important than ever. And I think that the last thing I would think about is prioritizing what's happening in community around the imperative to look at the issues of racial injustice. I think that we have a responsibility and an obligation to look at that, to do the self-examination, to hold the mirror up. In higher education, we sometimes think that we're doing it because we teach, we got it, and we can do our climate surveys and see that things, wow, we are looking great. Those give us a false sense of security. What we have to do is really interrogate what is happening and listen to that, because We cannot afford to lose a generation. We cannot afford to leave anybody out of the mission. So I think it's the flexibility, the working together in deep partnership, supporting one another more than ever, and doing that important hard work of tackling once and for all the systemic racism, because we come up through organizations and structures in which it's embedded, and we're working in community in which it's embedded. So until we pull those apart, we may not be able to do our best, most just, most sustainable work. So.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you. We do have a question. Your point about how COVID-19 didn't care about our calendar, our school year really, anything we do or when we do it was important. This may provide, as you suggest, some impetus for change. Maybe we aren't always doing things in the best way. But I keep hearing that changing what we do adds to our workload, change is work, and everyone is exhausted. I wonder what advice you would have to help spread the message that making change is not just a matter of added work, but added possibility.
Right, great question. And, and I think the exhaustion factor is real. I think that working in this way is tiring. There's something about, if anybody who's in the psychology discipline, you look at the notion of cognitive dissonance, where you're, looking at a screen, there's an intensity there. We can't be with one another, in the way that we do to be able to work together. So there is an exhaustion factor. We're worried. We are distracted, so it's not only the worry and distraction from our daily work, but our daily lives. Think about the freedoms we have given up, the trade-off. I think about Deborah Stone's paradox of trade-offs. And to be safe, we're trading off some freedom. So people are exhausted. There's no doubt about it. If you look at the young people and the intergenerational movement around the protests, people are exhausted. So that is a true statement. The hardest thing, it's like going through change does take work. There's no doubt about it. But I think it's how do we reframe it? The creative outcomes, because we are at we're beyond, I'm afraid that we're beyond a tipping point in higher education, because the size of the budget cuts that we're going to experience are going to force us to make even harder decisions. So I always feel like, let's get in front of it to the extent that we can. And so, but how do you look at that as an exciting, exhilarating piece when you're exhausted? So finding ways for people to work together. Can we create, some folks are enjoying the working remotely. How do we build that into a structure where, it doesn't have to be a one size fits all? I think the technology can help. We have to look at all pieces of this. What are teaching loads really look like? Where are people spending their time? Higher ed is a busy place. And so when you think about service and committees and teaching, it's a lot to do it well. So can we step back and look at that and really refocus what our priorities are? Really refocus our priorities and address our resources around that. And maybe there are things we trade off, because we can't keep doing it all. And we can't keep doing it all in the same way. So I don't have a good answer for the trade-offs, because those would be institution by institution. But this is a time where really stepping back and saying, what is at the heart of the institution? What are the things that we can't trade off? How do we mobilize our most creative work around that? I think also working in interdisciplinary fashion helps too. When you're working with colleagues who think differently, that's exciting and invigorating. And we have to find ways to put the fun back in it, right? We all missed the celebrations that are what kind of keep us moving forward. So how do we look ahead to future celebrations and convening? So, I don't have because it is the one thing I think is absolutely certain. This is an exhausting time. And just when you think you got it right, just when you think you have your plans all worked out, something else will come along. And so it's just, it's going to be a constant process of adapting and humility, and trying to do the best in keeping public safety first and foremost for our communities.
Thank you. Great answer. One of the things you mentioned in your presentation was that it's incumbent upon us to understand what our students and communities need now. And you implored us to think about the voices that we're missing. Whose voices are we missing? So in your experience and where we are right now, whose voices do you think we're missing?
I think that we're, when you look at the tables that we all sit around, you know, to be trite, kind of the usual suspects gather at those tables. So we tend to go towards systems of formal leadership as opposed to looking at informal leadership in our communities. I think we need to be listening to the voices of the young people who are leading some of the movements, active movements, energetic moments on racial justice. You know, what are they telling us that we need to hear that we haven't been listening to? I think within our campuses, listening to our students more. You know, when I worked, you know, the last couple of years at the Kennedy Institute, one of the things, having known Senator Kennedy and then having led the Institute, he firmly believed, you know, unleash the young people, let their voices lead. Any social movement has been invigorated by that youthful energy and enthusiasm, tempered or guided by those with some experience and wisdom. So I think coming together, but I think that we're missing the informal work of community. If I look in Boston, some of the powerful movements that are happening in the city right now, yes, there are business leaders mobilizing, but the other thing that's happening is that there are young activists emerging who are leading community in powerful ways. Nobody has given them the mantle of leadership. They're earning it by the way they're engaging with community. They are smart, they're on the scene, they know, you know, they're able to articulate and have the pulse. We have to be sitting at the table welcoming those individuals who are making these changes. You know, we have large nonprofits. Who are the small groups in community that are doing that deep, engaged work of community that sometimes go unnoticed, but are sometimes having the greatest impact? And how do we work together with those? How do we tie this work to the educational mission? Looking at that so that it's sustained and embedded. Because when you think about it, sometimes initiatives happen in community because a faculty member loves it and leads it, or a staff member does. If it's important to the institution, there has to be ways of sustaining it so that it can weather those transitions. So I think it's the sustainability. I think it's the generation that's stepping up to lead. I think it's examining who are the small nonprofits or small private sector businesses that are making a difference in community. But you've got to be intentional. You know, you have to tap somebody on the shoulder and say, come sit at this table, please. And then you have to listen and be willing to respond accordingly.
Thank you. That's excellent advice. And in the intentionality, I think, is really the strongest action word there. That's really good. Can you talk a little bit about supporting students in engaging them in conversation, ensuring free speech, but also upholding community perception and that balance act? It's a fine edge we walk there with encouraging students to speak their mind and free speech, but also maintaining a positive relationship sometimes with the community.
Well, first of all, you know, if we can't have conversations that are uncomfortable and ruffle people a little bit on college campuses, where else can we have those conversations? You know, we could do it in the town square, you know, one of the original models for education. We could all gather in the square, and maybe we should. I think that we should do that. And I think you have to discern between, you know, speech that makes you rattle versus speech that is driven by hate. And I think we have to separate the two because they're not the same. I mean, and I, you know, I remember as a college president being asked that question, and they're not the same. But we have to be open to, you know, and I think that's what David Brooks was getting at in his column, was that when we're erasing pieces because they make us uncomfortable, they make us think in a way that unsettles us, that's not doing the work of education, you know. So we need to be able to sift and sort that. We have to help our students understand the responsibility that comes with speaking one's mind. You know, that words matter, words hurt, words have intention. That's part of the educational mission, so that they know what they're doing. And then, you know, but we have to also, I think, look at when we're crossing a line. But I think, you know, higher ed, I was saying this to Melinda earlier, where it's interesting, we are considered to be, you know, liberal places, but sometimes as a body, we are a bit more conservative. And I think that we have to, you know, really, you know, be a place that nurtures and supports the free exchange of ideas, views that make us uncomfortable, a way of learning and speaking and processing that is respectful, that keeps others at the table. Because once we walk away from the table, we lose that chance of making change. But then we have to, I think, you know, call the question when something is in the arena of hate. There really should be no room for that, or inciting violence, or inciting, the kind of mobilization of hatred that we're seeing that's happening, sometimes 120 characters at a time.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn to Dr. Denise Battles, the president of SUNY Genesco, who has the final question.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I don't know if it rises to that level, but thanks. And thank you, Mary, for that wonderful presentation. I was struck by your comments about our upcoming elections in November. And I was getting a little nostalgic about a year ago when we started recognizing that that would be a key opportunity, a key teachable moment, and potentially add some challenges to our fall semester. Of course, that predated the pandemic, and so now that's only augmented what we're doing. But I'm wondering if you've seen any exemplars of strong community college partnerships that support positive student engagement around the election process, and what attributes you may have seen there, because I think that is something layered on top of the pandemic and getting our communities back safely in the fall. Will be navigating that exercise in democracy.
Yeah, I think there's some really good work happening through the American Democratic Network. I'm watching the name, but I'll send it to you later, Denise. Some of you maybe are part of it. I know that James Madison University is doing a lot of work in that space, impressive work, because what they're looking at is the connection between what's happening in the classroom, what's happening in elections. Their students are getting involved in really understanding local elections too, not just national, because it's kind of a farm team if you think about it. Who's running at the local level? What does that mean? How do you understand public policy? Who's representing you? So I think that James Madison, it's one place I've seen them doing just a fabulous job of engaging their students and their surrounding community by bringing local elected officials onto campus into conversation, where they're having vigorous discussions about differences of elected opinion and party opinion. So I'll send you that link, but there's schools across the country that are participating in that. And again, I'm betting a couple of you are, where it's really looking at the connection between education, action, voting, mobilization, participating with local elected officials so that you can learn from one another and there isn't that division between the community and the college campus, and then looking at what's happening at the national level. And I would encourage all of you to begin and get engaged in that work now, because no matter what happens in November, someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, and regardless of the outcome, the country is going to be at an incredible moment of strife. And so how you prepare, how you get ready for those conversations, how you activate. And I think, Denise, the other thing I would say, and it's easy for me to say because I'm not a president or a chancellor at the moment, so I, take this cheap advice for what it's worth. But, I think about this time, and I don't gamble, right? Maybe we all do a little bit, but as if you're at the roulette table and you've got your pile of chips. And, and it's been, higher ed has been getting dinged, for years by, we have to be careful because of what our states will say, what the nation will say. And each time we do that, we give up some ground. And I think that this is a time where we can't give up any more ground. We are at the brink of a crisis, and we have national leadership that is saying that it is okay to incite violence. It is okay. It underscores that white supremacist has a place. It is walking away in the United States Senate from its responsibility to govern. We have a crisis at every level of the electorate. And I think engaging our students, not about whether that's a Republican issue or a Democratic issue, but call it what it is. And so how do we get them involved? From working on campaigns to working on local elections. Who are your school council, your selectmen, your city councilors, your state reps, get to know those people, invite them to your campus to have conversations, help the students understand that these folks work for them, and have that debate and that discussion, and then inspire our students to move from the wonderful action that is driving the possibility of change right now. Because we need that, as John Lewis said, agitate, agitate, agitate. And we need that linked with a pathway towards change. And the best way we still change in this country is through the electoral process. Imperfect as it is, that is where the levers get pulled. And so we have to not shy away from that. And we have to be willing to take the stands, because there is so much at stake right now, more than ever. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that wraps up the Q&A portion of our event. And so Denise, I will turn it over to you for closeout.
Absolutely. And I want to start by expressing my sincere gratitude to our keynote speaker, Mary Grant, whom I've long admired. We overlapped, I think, for a matter of weeks, perhaps, in the UNC system, but was delighted that the system gained the benefit of her expertise, and appreciate her sharing that wisdom with us today, and really providing outstanding clarity to the key challenges that we face, and also the imperative for strong and effective partnerships as in order to deliver on our missions as public liberal arts colleges. So I know, Mary, you're uniquely qualified to offer that up, having been so engaged in UNC Asheville, our world headquarters, right, for COPLAC. So I very much appreciate that. And also am grateful that you found a way for those of us, and we're all dealing with pandemic planning in some way, right? Whether we're faculty trying to figure out how we deliver our content in an effective way, or staff figuring out how to best support the delivery of the mission, or those of us who are administrators, we're all kind of sorting through that right now. And I so admire your ability to see opportunity in what can be so draining on us. But I that's my lift for today, is trying to, in my challenge to myself, is to find those areas of opportunity for us as we navigate this set of challenges. I also want to thank our facilitators, so MB, and all the folks behind the scenes who are making the magic happen. So I appreciate that. And want to thank very much President Treadwell and all of her Keene State College colleagues for hosting this annual meeting. I know that it was a heavy lift, transitioning for something that mere months ago we were planning and expecting to be in person, and transitioning to something that is a virtual meeting. But I'm very grateful that you all were game for that, and did see the opportunity that came out of the pandemic in terms of bringing us all together, albeit remotely. And so that goes to my final expression of thanks, is really to all of you for being here at the COPLAC annual meeting, and for demonstrating that resilience and adaptability that we all are so much in need of at this time. It's a very exciting time for our organization as COPLAC. We do occupy a particular niche in the national higher education agenda. And this really is an organization that is powerful in terms of providing a source of support and comradeship during an unprecedentedly difficult time. And so I appreciate your engagement, and very much hope that you enjoy the meeting. Again, thank you to our wonderful keynote presenter, our facilitators, and our hosts, and to all of you